Good morning, guys. I hope you're having a great weekend. My name is Ruknar, and I will be taking this webinar on Python today. So let us begin. So before we start coding in Python, we should ask ourselves this question: why should we learn Python? So the reasons why, or some of the reasons why, is Python is easy to learn and widely used. So it is used in companies like Google, Netflix, NASA, Facebook, Amazon, and many other companies. Then when we learn Python, we can use Python in data science, in AI, automation, web development, sensors, and many other. The use case of Python is very wide. And the main benefit of learning Python, especially as a beginner, is that it is very simple and the syntax is readable. So if you look at a code of Python without even knowing without even knowing anything about the programming language, you will be able to guess what the program or the code will do. Right? So let us write our first programming language or our first program, Hello World. So let me create a script and name this Hello World. And so to print a statement in Python, it is actually very easy. We can do this in one line. And if I run this, you will see that Hello World is being printed. If you have some prior programming knowledge, like if you have learned or if you have studied Java or C++, you might remember that we had to write several lines of code before we could print a statement. We had to write a class, we had to write a function, and then inside that function, we had to write this statement. But in Python, you can do this in one line. So now we have seen in very many cases where we take input from the user and then we work on that input, right? So suppose I want to know from the user which is the day today of the week, and then I want to print that value, right? So how can I do that? So if I take this variable, ask the user enter day of the week, and then can modify the statement today is comma user input. If I run this, it will ask me today is Sunday. Look, today is Sunday. So it is this easy to take an input from the user and then print that value. Now, we have been using generative AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, and many others. And we can see that when we use these generative models, we ask them something and they reply back to us. Well, we can apply that logic or we can use that and we can create a very simple chatbot using Python's if-else logic. So let us see how we can do that. So let me create a new script. I will name this chatbot. So what we are going to do is we're going to take the user's input and then we are going to reply something back to the user. User input is equal to input. We do something like this. And if the user says hi, user input, we will say hello, how are you? Or hello, welcome to chatbot. If the user says how are you, then we will say print, I'm great, hope you are. Then if the user says bye, so if the user wants to end the conversation, what we can say is print bye. Hope to speak to you soon. And if the user gives us a response where it is not present in these three lines. What we can say is that please provide correct response. Now, if I run this, let us see what happens. So saying you. So if I say hi, say hello, welcome to Chatbot. So if I say how are you, it's I'm great, hope you're doing well. Now suppose I choose something like this where I give it a random response. It will tell me please provide a correct response. And if I say bye, it will say bye. Right. So it is this easy to just build a simple logic using if else. Now, now let us look at loops. Right. So, what are loops? Loops are basically when we have to do something over and over again, when there is an iteration, we will use loops, right? So, to show you how loops work, I will build a simple countdown timer. And yes, let me show you. So, I'll name this countdown timer. And we have seen in various websites where we have to click a link, or if we want to download something, it shows us that to wait for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and after that the link is visible, right? So I'm trying to apply that kind of a functionality here, and let us see how we can do that. So suppose I will use a for loop here. I will run it for 5 seconds till 1 second, and I will print this. And when it is finished, I will say wait, wait is over. And if I want to, I will go on this. Okay, run this statement. As you can see that we have this timer, wait is over, this is being printed. So it is this easy to create a for loop in Python and then to run this. Right. So we have created a for loop where it starts from 5, it goes to 0, and it prints the I every time, and it waits for 1 second, and it again prints the statement. Right. So this is one kind of a loop. It is called a for loop, and we have something called as a while loop as well. So while loop, the syntax of while loop is something like this. We comment this out. Take this. While I is let's see, and I will print I, and I will use again the time function for the time module, and then I will reduce the value of I. I run this. You will see a similar. So we can see that using while loops or for loops, we can perform this type of functionalities. Now the question comes, when should we use for loops and when should we use while loops? So when we know how many times our loop should run, in that case, we should always choose for loops. And when we do not know how many times our loop will run or how many times or how many iterations do we need, then in that case, we will use while loops, right? So now let me ask you this question. Suppose I have written this code and I want to use this logic in different programs or in different Python scripts. So in that case, should I write this code every time? So if I need this piece of code 5 or 10 times, so will I write will I write the same thing 5 to 10 times? The answer is no. That will be and this is a small piece of code, but if it was 100 lines, 200 lines, then that would be a very huge task for us to do something over and over again, right? So here comes the power of functions. So what functions does is that instead of writing the same code again and again, we can write it once and then we can use it in different places, right? So let me show you how we can do that. So I will use the while loop and I will try to convert this into a function. So to define a function, we use the keyword def, and I can call this the countdown function, use parentheses. Right. So I've created this function, and I can call this function by just simply saying countdown timer function. Right. So here the this response is being printed. But what if I want to use this in a different function, right? What if I want to use it here? So what I will do in that case, from my scripts, I will import this and I can use this here, or suppose the user has asked for the countdown timer. We can just call this function, right? And if I run this, and if I say countdown timer, you will see that this piece of code is working. If I say right, it should exit. So this is good. So this is the power of functions that we have in Python. We define a function using the def keyword, and then we place a piece of code that we need to use over and over again inside the function. And wherever we want to use that piece of code, we import it and then we call it. Okay. So now, since we have understood the power of functions, let us look at something a bit more challenging, right? So we all know that when we are working or when we are trying to use a website, it often asks us to sign up and it asks us for a password, for a username and a password, and it gets tedious at one point of time to always create a new password. So let us try to create a password generator using Python that will give us the password, and we don't need to think of it ourselves, right? So I will use or I will create a new Python file called the password generator. And let me create this script where I will be able to generate a. So let me call this function password function. I have a length set to size 8 and letters. So when we are creating a password, we have these clauses where we have to select a lowercase letter, uppercase letter. We have to use digits and as well as punctuation. So we'll use all of those. Punctuation, and I will create the password. And those characters, and it return this value. Right. So now if I call this or if I try to print password generate function, I want to print the value. we can see that every time we call this function or we run this piece of code, it will give us a new password. And suppose in a website, when you're trying to create a account in that website, it asks for a password that has to be of size 12. If I give it 12 here, and if I run this, we will have a password of size 12. Right. Now, password generation is one thing, but what about OTPs? So we use OTPs, and OTPs are sent to us on a everyday basis whenever we are trying to do something. So how difficult it is to create a OTP generator? Actually, it is very easy. Let me show it to you. Let me delete this. Let me create a OTP generator function, and I'll set the default length to this and digits. This will create our OTP. I return this OTP. And if I print this, we will see that it will generate an OTP every time we call this function. And every time I call this function, or if I run this piece of code, it will give me a new answer. So, and in some case, if you want to create this, or if you want to use this in your software and you want to generate a OTP of size 4, if I just give 4 here, and if I run this, it will give me this value. Now, I have this chatbot, I have this countdown timer, I have this, right? What if I want to combine all of these things into a single, into this chatbot? And what I want to do is, I want the user to ask for a password or ask for a OTP, and then the user has to wait for 5 seconds, and then the user will receive his password or OTP, right? So let us implement that logic here. So instead of countdown timer, what if the user just asks for a password? Right? The user is fed up with providing new passwords or thinking about new passwords, so he's asking us for an idea, and we're going to help him do that. Right? So let me import scripts, generator. So let me modify this code. What? And what I'm doing here is I'm taking this value, which is set to 5 by default, and we can modify it as per our requirement. Every time this function is called, it's over. So first we will call this function, then we will call the password function. Password generator dot function. So this will give us a password. And what we would want to do is we will print this value, your password is, and we could do the same thing with OTP where the user requires an OTP from us. To OTP. And we could implement the same logic. It's a print OTP is, and instead of the password generator function, we will use the OTP generator function. Right. And now, if I run this code, let us see what happens. So I say hi, say hello, welcome to chatbot, and I just directly ask for the password. So please wait for 5 seconds. Could you wait is over? No. And if I say buy, the code is finished. Now, we are doing this inside ID. What if I want to? I don't know. So suppose we could look at it in this way as well. If I want to do this using, I can just AMD. Let us see how we can run this piece of code using command prompt. If I say chatbot, I hope I'm having this name correct for the same. Good. Awesome. So what we have to do is that we have to remove this. And if I try this again, it is asking for my response. So I say hi, welcome to chatbot. Or how are you? Well, so I want to ask the OT. What is the OT? Please suddenly, please wait for 5 seconds. So it is providing me the OTP. And if I run this again, first I have to say bye. And then if I run this again and I just directly ask for the OTP, I'll have to wait for 5 seconds. Okay. So we can see that it will provide us an OTP, a different OTP every time, right? So we have used OTP so many times, but the logic for OTP is very simple, as we can see here, right? Within 3 lines, we were able to generate an OTP. And we can use this in our softwares or wherever we wanted to, right? So that is the power of Python. So we can see that using Python, we can do these or we can do these complex things into, we can break down these complex problems into very simple actions, right? So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. And if you have any questions, you can let us know. And I hope we can connect very soon. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time and hope you have a great Sunday.